All right, so in the last video, we were looking at Schopenhauer's distinction between willing, like very intentional, thoughtful action and acting and understanding in our experience, and this sort of will-less, pure knowing, contemplation, right? So in this video, we're going to continue where we left off. We'll elaborate a little bit more on that distinction, and a lot of this is going to be over his concept of the sublime, his notion of what the sublime is, and also the beautiful. At the tail end of the video, we'll talk about the beautiful. It's interesting, though, that in our textbook, we get a treatment of the sublime from Schopenhauer. It basically completely, as far as I could tell, mirrors almost not word for word, but I mean conceptually it mirrors Kant. So Kant talked about the sublime as well, but they left that part out. I guess there was enough material already there from the third critique that they had to cut some of it, and they cut the sublime. But it gives the reader the impression that this is completely Schopenhauer's philosophy, that this notion of the sublime is completely Schopenhauerian. But really, it's completely drawn directly from Kant. Okay. So again, more on the sublime in a minute, but we've got a few more things to cover real quick before we move on to that topic, and we're going to keep focusing here just now for the moment on this distinction between pure knowing, pure contemplative knowing, and willing. Okay. So obviously, he thinks that certain people, if you have an inward disposition towards it, you can achieve this state of will-less contemplation, but not everybody, right? That it's hard for most of us to for us to maintain this. We get easily distracted, right? I wonder if you would think about our generation, right? The ADHD generation. What would you think about? Well, I'm not that generation. I'm Gen X, right? Exclude me from that. I'm not a millennial, right? Sorry for millennials watching. I know y'all get enough grief already. But this has a lot to do with genius, right? We're going to talk about genius a bit in this video, okay? We're going to come back to it a little bit. He brings it up throughout the reading, but this is where he first introduces it. And he says that, it has something to do with its ability to do this, to think this way, to pull yourself out of your daily grind and to have this pure aesthetic contemplation. He says most of us can't do this. Most men remain almost always at this standpoint because they entirely lack objectivity. In other words, genius. Genius is objectivity. It's the ability to see the Platonic ideal in those things, right? Therefore, they have no pleasure in being alone with nature. They need company, or at least a book. For their knowledge remains subject to their will. They seek, therefore, in objects only some relation to their will. And whenever they see anything that has no such relation, there sounds within them, like a great bass or bass in music, the constant inconsolable cry, "It's of no use to me." Thus, in solitude, the most beautiful surroundings have for them a desolate, dark, strange, and hostile appearance, right? It's like I go to the park sometimes on a beautiful day, and I'll see someone sitting on a park bench with their cell phone, and their earbuds in. They're not hearing the beautiful birds chirping, right? And the wind rustling through the trees, and they're not looking at the rays of sunlight going through the trees. And they don't feel the soft grass. They're just listening to their, sounds like, I don't know what it is with all this hip hop music now. They're like using the same drum beat pattern because it sounds like they're listening to an old sprinkler in their head. It's like, I don't know, anyway. Sorry, hip hop fans. I like hip hop, it's just not that stuff. But anyway, so the genius is able to, this is my cat, by the way. She's making it really hard to film this video. She wants attention. I usually pay attention to her in the morning, so I'm going to give her a little cameo appearance. Okay, you got a bunch of attention. All right, there you go. Back to your play. So anyway, the genius is able to do this. Genius is able to has this inward disposition to see things this way, right? Okay. What does he say about the past, right? Our will-less perception of the past. He says it tends to be easier for us to experience things this way, purely aesthetically, in a pure will-less contemplative knowing, when we're thinking about the past, right? We're detached from our interests at the time. So, I mean, this is maybe the origin of nostalgia, right? We have this sort of idealistic view of the past sometimes. Maybe it wasn't as good as we remember. But he says that, maybe there's an explanation for this. It is this blessedness of will-less perception which casts an enchanting glamour over the past and distant and presents them to us in so fair a light by means of self-deception. For as we think of the days long gone by, days in which we lived in a distant place, it is only the object which our fancy recalls, not the subject of will, which bore about with it then its incurable sorrows, just as it bears with them now. But they are forgotten, because since then they've often given place to others, right? So we don't remember all the difficulty, how we were like really dirt poor back then and trying to pay rent, and we just think about, oh, remember hanging out at that one place and that was so great, remember that one guy we knew, what happened to him, right? We just remember all the good stuff, right? Whatever our fancy recalls, as he puts it, okay? So now we get into his discussion of the beautiful and the sublime, and really more on the sublime than the beautiful. That the beautiful we'll kind of save till the end of the video, and there's not much he says about it. It's very brief, okay? But, here he gets into this notion of the sublime, and again, this is straight from Kantian aesthetics, right? If these very objects whose significant forms invite us to pure contemplation have a hostile relation to the human will in general, as it exhibits itself in its objectivity, in other words, the human body, if they're opposed to it so that it's menaced by the irresistible predominance of their power, or sinks into insignificance before their immeasurable greatness, if nevertheless, the beholder does not direct his attention to this eminently hostile relation to his will, but although perceiving and recognizing it, turns consciously away from it, forcibly detaching himself from his will and its relations, and giving himself up entirely to knowledge, quietly contemplates those very objects that are so terrible to the will, comprehends only their idea, remember that Platonic sense, which is foreign to all relation. It's not attached to that principle of sufficient reason, so that he lingers gladly over its pure contemplation, and is thereby raised above himself, his person, his will, and all will. In that case, he's filled with the sense of the sublime, right? That's what he means by the sublime. It's this experience of things that normally would be horrifying and could kill us and crush us, or things that are just overwhelming and huge and huge scale that make us feel insignificant, right? This is a sense of the sublime. We feel a sense of the sublime before this, right? He's in such a state of spiritual exaltation, and therefore the object of producing such a state is called sublime. Right, and there's various degrees of this, he says. There come to be various degrees of the sublime, and the transitions from the beautiful to the sublime, according as this additional quality is strong, bold, urgent, near or weak, distant and merely indicated, right? If I'm at the ruins here, that's an ancient society, and I'm just thinking of old age, and it's sort of like I'm not threatened by anything in this when I'm visiting the ruins here in Cambodia, these ancient ruins at Angkor Wat, right? There's nothing threatening me, but then I think about the age and the time and how old they are, and then I think about death and how short my life is. But if I'm able to sort of not let that bother me and just think about it and appreciate them that way, I'm experiencing the sublime, and they are sublime. Those objects are called sublime, right? If I'm looking at the dark clouds and the rays of light, right, just this overwhelmingness, right, the scale of it, that might be the sublimeness, or maybe the darkness of it, the forebodingness of the, maybe it's going to be raining and the thunder, right? These are all examples, different varying degrees of the sublime, right? So he gives us a couple examples. This is supposed to be kind of a very subtle example of the sublime, and then he's going to work his way up to a more intense one, right? I'm not going to go over all of them. This is a very long passage. I left a lot out. He goes over at least 4 or 5 or 6 examples of varying intensities of our experience of the sublime. So this is the first one, right? This is the kind of the more mild one. So let us suppose such a scene, stripped also of vegetation and showing only naked rocks. Then from the entire absence of that organic life which is necessary for existence, the will at once becomes uneasy. The desert assumes a terrible aspect. Our mood becomes more tragic. The elevation to the sphere of pure knowing takes place with a more decided tearing of ourselves away from the interest of the will. And because we persist in continuing in the state of pure knowing, the sense of the sublime distinctly appears. So this is not the most subtle. Like there's one before this that's even more weak, right? But this is another example of, it's not foreboding. It's not like this, this hurricane is coming, but it's still somewhat sublime and bleak. And yet if we can find beauty in that scene, we're experiencing the sublime. If we can get a pure contemplative experience out of it, that is the sublime. Okay, we're getting a little bit more intense. The vastness of the world, which disquieted us before, rests now in us. This is that. And once we get to that point, our dependence upon it is annulled by its dependence on us, right? Right. The idea that our dependence on the world, we need food, sustenance, things like this to survive. But yet, if we can detach ourselves from that and realize, well, the world is my idea, to use his idealism, right? And I'm a pure contemplative being. I'm pure will, and I'm one with it all. This is certainly at play in our experience of the sublime, when we see, these foreboding, this torrent coming in, right? There's something that could kill us, and yet, even though it threatens, we don't feel that threat. We just merely contemplate it. All this, however, does not come at once into reflection, but shows itself merely as the felt consciousness that in some sense or other, which philosophy alone can explain, we are one with the world and therefore not oppressed, but exalted by its immensity, right? So we shouldn't feel belittled and smaller because of the immensity, but feel in awe and become almost lifted and exalted because we are this. We are all one, right? Again, very, very, Buddhist, very, Hindu, right? Certain forms of Hindu. I know not all Hindu are monistic, right? In the sense that they think everything is one. But quite a few schools are. There are some dualistic forms of Hindu, I know. But this isn't a lecture on Hinduism, right? We're talking about Schopenhauer's world as will and representation, right? And his philosophy of art in that book. So more about the sublime. Even the vault of the starry heavens produces this if it is contemplated without reflection, but just in the same way as the vault of stone, and only by its apparent, not its real extent. Some objects of our perception excite us in the feeling of the sublime, because not only on account of their spatial vastness, but also of their great age, that is, their temporal duration, we feel ourselves dwarfed to insignificance in their presence, and yet revel in the pleasure of contemplating them. Of this kind are very high mountains, the Egyptian pyramids and colossal ruins of great antiquity, right? So it's obvious that, and this is kind of, might be different a bit from what Aristotle says about the beautiful and about making judgments about whether something is good or bad or beautiful. He says that it's too big, the scale's too big, and you can't see it all at once, then it couldn't be beautiful, right? And also if it's too small, but that's not really a point here. But for Kant, he says, no, sometimes this, not for Kant. This ripoff of Kant, Schopenhauer, for him, the vastness of the universe can be impetus for this experience. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of the video here. A couple slides on the beautiful to wrap things up, and then we'll take a breather, take a bit of a break. This is the last video I'll be recording for probably a few days. I've got some guests coming in. Actually, anyways, not going to get into my personal stuff too much, but I won't have time to record videos for the next few days, until probably Monday or Tuesday for my students who are watching this. So we're going to end here on the beautiful. And again, very quick, very brief, right? This comes up again in a little bit throughout his exploration of different types of art when he becomes kind of the art critic. So he's not going to completely leave us hanging here, but his treatment of the beautiful seems very anemic compared to all the attention he gives to the sublime. And this kind of upsets me. Again, it gives you the wrong impression if you're taking my class that Kant has nothing to do with this, right? It kind of gives Schopenhauer credit for a lot of Kant's work. But anyway, so what does he say about the beautiful? Enough about the sublime. When we say a thing is beautiful, we thereby assert that it is an object of our aesthetic contemplation. And this has a double meaning. On the one hand, it means that the sight of the thing makes us objective. That is to say, that in contemplating it, we are no longer conscious of ourselves as individuals, but as pure will-less subjects of knowledge. On the other hand, it means that we recognize in the object not the particular thing, but an idea. And this can only happen so far as our contemplation of it is not subordinated to the principle of sufficient reason. It does not follow that the relation of the object to anything else outside of it, but it rests in the object itself. Okay? So, I'm going to go through this again real quick. Again, something is beautiful. There's two sides to this. It's a double meaning. On the one hand, we're talking about it makes us objective. In other words, it makes us this will-less subject of pure contemplation. Also means that this object presents the Platonic idea, right? The object is, the work of art presents this particular thing that really brings forth and to objectivity this universal truth, this universal Platonic idea, right? This ideal. And that can only happen insofar as our contemplation is not subordinated to that principle of sufficient reason. We're not trying to give reasons. It doesn't follow the relation of the object to anything outside of it, right? And that's because that's always connected with the relations to our will, right? What is it good for? Why is it next to that? That can't be a part of our contemplation, but it has to rest in the object itself, right? That always rests in the object itself. So again, these two elements, the Platonic idea and the will-less subject, he says, are really what we're talking about when we talk about the beautiful. In a sense, this is pretty Kantian. It's different from Kant in that his account of the beautiful is different. He would define it differently, but it's an experience. It's not necessarily a property of a thing. It's not a property of the object. It's an experience of the will-less subject of the Platonic idea, right? For Kant, it's the interplay of the imagination, the understanding, right? It's a certain movement of the mind, for lack of a better expression. And that's what makes it beautiful, is it makes our mind have this reaction. But no, for Schopenhauer, it is an experience. Kant's right about that. The beautiful is a sort of experience. It's not a property in the object. But what it is the experience, again, of this will-less subject of the Platonic idea in the work of art. Okay, this is funny. Everything is beautiful then, on this definition, right? Since, on the one hand, every given thing may be observed in a purely objective manner. So you can always, again, at will, if you're good enough, you can have this inward disposition to reflect in this way and be purely contemplative and detach yourself from all, your needs and your desires, right? And so since anything can be observed in this purely objective manner, apart from all relations, and also, on the other hand, the will manifests itself in everything at some grade of its objectivity. We didn't talk a lot about this so far, right? I think I've mentioned it, or at least hinted about it, but the flower is an objectification of will. Even a brick or a rock or even inanimate things are somehow, they have a force in them. They're compelled to move. And so there's something in them. So on some level, everything is a manifestation of the will at some grade, some level of its objectivity. He's riffing a bit off, I think, of Plato's hierarchy too, right? Some things have more being and have more objectivity or truth than others, right? He's kind of, I think there's a parallel between him and Plato in this regard. But everything is a manifestation of the will. Everything is an expression of the idea in that sense. And so it follows that everything is beautiful. Thank you, Schopenhauer. I agree. I'm very beautiful. But I like this William Blake quote, everything is beautiful in its own way, exuberance is beauty. That's kind of Schopenhauer. In its own way, it is an expression of its inner will, its inner disposition, which is an expression of this Platonic ideal or idea. And exuberance is beauty, right? Its ability to do that, its willpower, its ability to effectively execute that inner will is what exactly we mean by beauty, by something being beautiful. And that fits just perfectly in, I think, with Schopenhauer's aesthetics. Okay, so what do we have coming, right? We are not going to have any lectures up for at least the next couple, 2 or 3 days, for those of you who are watching this when it first comes out. But in the next few videos, we'll talk about how the will expresses itself in different works of art. We're not going to go through everything. There's a lot of details in our book that we're skipping. We're going to focus primarily on architecture. We're going to look a little bit about at the will, how it expresses itself in nature and paintings that represent nature. Talking about human beauty and portraits and things like this. A lot of good stuff coming up in the next few videos, and also even almost like an epistemology of art, right? How do we know about beauty, right? How do we come to get to an understanding of it? And this will tie back into notions of genius, and we'll get into a little bit more details about what Schopenhauer means about genius. Sorry for the long conclusion, and I seem to be rambling, but I want to get a lot of info in because I know I'm not going to be posting any more Schopenhauer videos for at least another 4 or 5 days probably. So anyway, that's what we have to look forward to. Thanks for sticking it out for this first sort of run of Schopenhauer videos, and I will hopefully see you guys on the other side. Take care, stay safe.